Hi, welcome to Car Mechanical. In part 2 of removing the Honda Jazz gearbox, we will be removing the intake manifold, the starter motor and the drive shafts. So as you can see, I'm starting on the starter motor trying to get access to it. Now according to the Haynes manual, you can just remove this in situ. Honestly, it's much easier if you're going to take the intake manifold off, because if we jump up above, we can just see all of our access is tight as anything. You can kind of do it, but you might as well take the intake manifold off. So to start with, we're going to take the engine cover off, and then we're going to undo the intake manifold. So the intake manifold's held on with 7 bolts. You can see sort of 4 of them along the top, which I'll point out as we go along. Also going to remove some of the bits and pieces that connect the intake manifold as well. So there's a couple of connectors. So to remove the intake manifold, we need to remove the throttle body. So we're going to undo all of these connectors, which have bits of the wiring harness attached to the throttle body and sort of attached in situ to bits of the engine and the manifold. So we're going to take off the throttle body, which is held on with 4 bolts. So we're going to come across to that in just one moment. I'm just going to speed this up. Once you get all 4 of those undone, it will allow this throttle body to be pulled back. We don't need to undo everything else, it can just be pulled out of the way. And then we can move on to the next part of getting the intake manifold off itself. So that's everything undone. We can pull that to one side. What we now need to do is undo these 7 bolts. So I think there's 4 through the top, and then there's 3 through the lower part. And you may need an assortment of ratchets and extensions and wobble joints and stuff just to get this all undone. So you may be switching between some mini extensions and some long sockets, or some short sockets and mini extensions and stuff. But you're going to do all 7 of those. Once they're all undone, undo the bits again in the way of the manifold. You may want to take the dipstick out and then the dipstick support off. What we also need to do is, I'll just put a screwdriver in here, but we're going to pull off this vacuum pipe. Behind the manifold, this is kind of hard to see, there's a bracket that holds another piece of it on, so we need to undo that. So apologies for the sped up footage because it took ages, but basically in the back corner there's a little bolt needs to be undone. There's another vacuum hose to be undone. Sometimes these can be very stiff, they can take a lot of persuasion, you may need a screwdriver just to pry under them, but they will just pull off. What we're going to do is we're going to take the manifold off, of course, after we take off that last vacuum pipe. And this is just undoing the dipstick housing because it was just getting in the way just a little bit, and just getting that little bit of extra manoeuvring room allowed the manifold to come out. So you may have to manoeuvre things a bit, wiggle them back and forth, but then you have the manifold out, and more importantly we've got the access to move on to the starter motor. In theory, the starter motor should be a couple of unbolts and it should come straight out, simple enough. I mean, the first one there we can get to with a breaker bar, and we can undo the bolt on the back of the starter motor, and then once we've broken it off we can use a ratchet to undo it. However, the next one is going to be quite difficult. So first of all, let's get all of the little ancillary bits off. So just where I'm going into there, so we need to undo that positive terminal here on the back of the starter. There's some other little connectors around there as well that you need to do. See if we can get a zoom in a moment and get a closer look. So that's the kind of access that you do have. That connector as well, just up above it, may be worth taking out of the way when you want to pull the starter itself out, because you want to be able to pull it back and manoeuvre it a little bit. So you just can unfinish undoing that by finger, remove the nut, and then slide the connector off. Now this is the really fun bit, is you need to come under the car, you need to go up and over the starter motor with an assortment of ratchets, and you need to undo that bolt there. This took quite a long time. I'm just going to show you some of the different configurations and different ways that I tried to do it. So I had to use a mini sort of breaker bar to give me a bit more leverage in the short amount of space. Another thing was that I kept having to change the combinations of sockets on there and backed myself into the pipe behind it before. So I had to do it back up, and I had to use sort of another long but slightly shorter socket setup. Basically it just took quite a bit of time, but eventually you'll get it off. I'm not going to put you through all of that, so we're going to skip to taking the starter motor out in a second after we get that last bolt out. And I'm just sort of showing you the sort of movements I did. This was a long time spent on my back. Very, very small ratchet movements, backing it off just a little bit at a time, but you will get there, but do allow a bit of time for it all to happen. So with the bolt out, we'll finish taking the one out of the other side. I left that in so when we did undo it, it was sort of nice and quick and we weren't playing with the starter motor too much, so we weren't slacking it off trying to do the other bolt. The starter motor in theory should just come out, but it was very, very stiff, so we had to give it a good couple of whacks. So block of wood, which is nice and soft because wood will get damaged, and just sort of hit it with a hammer from behind, and eventually what we see is the starter motor does come free. Potentially this starter motor's been in there for quite a number of years. This isn't the car's first gearbox, so we see some scrapyard markings on it as we take it off, but you know, we eventually managed to pry it free. So once the starter motor is free, things are very tight in there, but there is an angle at which you can get it out, so you kind of have to back it out, take it forward and up, and then back it back down. So which I'm sort of trying to demonstrate here. I think I'll switch with a friend so I can film it whilst he does it. But it will come out and down. And when you're in the bay of the Honda Jazz, you sort of see how tight all of this is, and you realise how much of a lie the Haynes manual was telling you. So now we've got that out. Okay, so before moving on to the drive shaft, we're going to remove these gear linkage brackets. They're not particularly related, but just as we're moving through everything, I'm just going to present it in the order that I was doing certain things. So there's 4 bolts in here. They've all been cracked off and loose, and I'm just undoing the rest by hand. What this can allow us to do after that is to get the gear linkages out of the way fully. I was hoping this would maybe give some access from above for the pry bar, but it doesn't. So once we've got these undone, we're going to bag and tag all of the bolts that we are taking out. It's very important that we keep these organised, basically because you want to know where they go when they go back. So get some food bags and get some post-its and label everything. So now that's loose, we can tuck this out of the way. Now it's going to be key for undoing the gearbox after we get the drive shafts out anyway. So to get the drive shafts off, we've already got the car jacked up. So we're going to remove the hubcaps. You won't need to, obviously, if you have alloys. And then we need to unstake the drive shaft nut. So it's been staked in, it's just do that with a screwdriver. Take quite a bit of work. I'll show it on the other side to get a better shot of the camera. But basically just using the hammer or a chisel, you just need to push that back out, and then we can undo that nut as well. So it's a 36mm socket that you're going to need, and yep, we've got the car off the ground at the moment, so what's going to happen is one of us is going to go stand on the brakes whilst we undo it. Might take quite a bit of force to undo that, but then once it's off, we can do the other side as well to show that. But once it's off, you're then set and good to go. So we can get the wheels off both sides, and then we're going to move to taking off the drive shafts. So one thing that was very clear quickly after taking all the nuts off is that the wheels didn't want to come off without a bit of persuasion. So I just went behind them with a block of wood and a hammer just to loosen them off of the hub. And again, we have to do it on the other side as well. So this time hit it from both sides. That's just kind of shock it from both sides and to free it up. But when I was pulling on the wheels, they didn't want to come off, but the extra bit of shock load just helps take everything off there. So what we're going to do next for the drive shaft is we're going to remove the hub from the shock absorber or the suspension. And what you can do here as well to get the drive shaft out is undo the ball joint below using a ball joint splitter. We're going to come to that a little bit later, and I didn't really need it to get the drive shafts out, they're just about manoeuvrable. So these are 17mm either side. So I cracked those off with a breaker bar, and then I was able to get in with a socket and spanner on either side and just to undo them. So we are speeding this up quite a bit here. Some of this was quite a bit creaky. You may want to be adding plus gases as well. Once we've done that, we can undo the anti-roll bar link. These will be a 14 or a 15mm, and you need to hold it with a 17mm on just the inside, and sometimes have a hex fitting. Really depends on what kind of anti-roll bar link you've got, if it's an aftermarket or original. Once that's undone, tuck it out of the way. So one thing I did was left the nuts in the hub to the shock absorber itself. That was just hold everything up till I was actually ready to remove them. But once you are ready, I'm just going to knock them through the hammer because they were a bit stiff, and then we can pull them out, and then hopefully the hub will pull forward and we can get the drive shaft out. So we're going to pull those out to one side. We are actually going to put them back in straight after. We don't want this hub sort of hanging free and putting strain on the brake line. So we're going to pull that forward. Now, one bad habit of mine is putting on the brake dust shield. Bends it, they can hit the disc. Try not to pull on that part itself. And now the drive shaft needs to be tapped through. So I'm just going to raise it on the bottom of the hub or the disc here, and we're going to use a socket and we're going to knock the drive shaft through with a hammer because it doesn't want to pull through. So from your toolkit, just grab an appropriate size socket and then grab a mallet or a hammer, and we're just going to knock it through. And you just want to knock it through until there's sort of no more resistance. You'll see the hub's actually coming forward, so it's freed itself from any sort of bonded rust that's kind of built up over the years at the back. And now the drive shaft's free. Now, in theory, the drive shaft should pop out the other side. However, I had quite a bit of issues here, so I was trying to use a crowbar, screwdrivers, different bits and pieces, turning the drive shaft out. So you can see it's popped out a bit of tripod joint. Just didn't want to come out. It does come out once we get the gearbox out of the car and we're able to get a bit more access to it. This just turned to be an absolute nightmare, and for whatever reason we couldn't get it out at the time. I'll come back to that when we get the gearbox out of the car itself. So just quickly we'll go over the other side again because we've got some better sort of camera footage. So a couple of 17 mils, we're going to undo the hub. We also need to undo the anti-roll bar link as well, but first we'll get these bolts out. So I tend to leave them in place and I can knock them out, and the last thing when I need to pull it out. Other thing I could have done here, could have undone the ball joint and split that and knocked that down, which makes the hub even more manoeuvrable, makes it easy to take the drive shaft out in a minute. So what we've shown you here is the anti-roll bar. So a couple of these, sometimes you can use like a little hex fitting that goes in, then you just undo the nut, or sometimes I like this, we have to hold it with a spanner, so it's a 17 mil, I think it's a 15 mil nut here, and we can get that undone and we can just swing that out of the way. I'm going to knock the drive shaft in a little bit with a socket. So now we know that's loose, I'm going to take the bolts out. Then I can swing the hub out of the way. That gives me just enough space to get the drive shaft out. And it's one of them where if I split the ball joint, it could really get things out of the way a lot more. Also turning the steering might give you a bit more manoeuvrability. And again, avoid my bad habit of grabbing the back of the disc shield. So I was hoping at this point it would just come out, but a little bit more work was needed just to knock the drive shaft out. So we grab a socket again and a hammer and we just knock it through. So once that's free, although it is quite tight, there is just enough space to get the drive shaft out. And the way we're going to deal with it is by taking it out from the other end. So it's going to get a crowbar in there, which pops the drive shaft out nicely, unlike the other side. And then we just need to lift it over this shield here, and then we can pull the drive shaft out. Okay, that's it for part 2. We've got the drive shafts out or disconnected and they can come out with the gearbox. So what we're going to be moving on to in part 3 is disconnecting everything on the subframe and dropping the subframe out of the car, ready for gearbox removal. Okay, please leave any comments or feedback in the comment section down below. If you like this video, please hit the like button. If you'd like to see more videos like this, please hit subscribe. And more than anything, thank you for watching.